Today's public session is scheduled from 9 to 9:45. The board will convene an executive session to conduct annual reviews with the Enterprise Executive Committee, President Cruz Rivera, and Executive Director Arnold. The board is expected to adjourn its meeting at approximately 4:15 at the end of the executive session. Before going to our first item, I just have a couple of announcements. Regent Brewster, I think, is going to join us by Zoom. Regent Reese by Zoom, so hopefully they will show up momentarily. And then secondly, is I just have a couple of gifts. For Ray Anderson, I have his West Virginia hat, which I will give to President Crow to give to Ray.
Wonderful.
Is President Cruz Rivera here yet? Oh, you are. I have instructions for you on how to silence your phone. He gave a commencement address the other day, and in the middle of his most sort of emotional moment, his phone goes off.
These are my hearing aids.
But on a more serious note, President Robbins, I hope you'll find this as cool as I do. A friend of mine in Tucson who's down on Granada is the great-great-great-granddaughter of the first Secretary of the University of Arizona, and cleaning out a closet and found the original documents of the first budgets and the first actions taken to start the University of Arizona, and I thought that somebody perhaps in your archives office.
The good old days.
Good ideas. Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
Gifts for everyone.
I thought you were giving President Cruz Rivera a medical kit.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll give him some money instead.
Take it.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Our first item today is the approval of the consent agenda. First, does anyone have a conflict to declare on items 3 through 9? Hearing none, great. I move that the board approve items 3 through 9 as listed on the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Any abstentions? The motion carries. The next item on the agenda is a request from Arizona State University to authorize settlement of an arbitration matter regarding a wrongful termination claim brought by Jessica Santos, former co-head of the ASU women's gymnastics team. I'd like to mention that this item does have a possible executive session built into it and has been posted should we have a need to discuss those legal questions when the item is presented. So I'm going to ask Lisa Liu to come forward and present this item. Lisa?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chair Duvall and members of the Regents. ASU seeks authorization to enter into a settlement with the former co-chair of the gymnastics team. She is appealing her termination. ASU believes we have good cause for the termination, fully defensible. But in the interests of the program and of the university, we seek to settle this for $65,000, which is above the $50,000 threshold that requires board approval. If you have any questions, as Chair Duvall says, we're happy to go into executive session.
Any questions of Lisa? Hearing none, I move that the board approve Arizona State University's request to authorize a settlement of the arbitration matter regarding a wrongful termination claim brought by Jessica Santos, co-head of the ASU women's gymnastics team, as discussed in the summary. Do I have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those signify with an aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, our next item is the FY 2025 state budget request. Brad Kendricks is coming to the table. We'll provide an overview of the state budget request. University presidents and CFOs will be available to answer questions at the end of the presentation. Brad, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Regent Val, Regents. We'll go ahead and get started. So in today's presentation is to review the FY25 proposed budget request from the Arizona Board of Regents and the State University System to the Arizona Governor's Office for consideration as they put together the FY25 budget that will be presented by the Governor next January. In order to put this request together, we worked with each of the university's teams in order to pull together their priorities, in order to then organize those and coordinate them according to board priorities in order to put together a compelling package that represents the interests of the system in coming years. So to that end, we've coalesced around a $440 million package that focuses on 3 primary areas. One of those is healthcare education, our Arizona Healthy Tomorrows initiative. The second is expanding access to higher education in Arizona. And the last is necessary capital investment that our universities need in order to stay vibrant and healthy. So we'll be briefly walking through each of those areas so you get a sense of the projects that are included. And then we will, at the end, invite the presidents and the university CFOs to engage in any additional comments or context that might be helpful. So first, focusing on Arizona Healthy Tomorrow, that is a package of projects that total $140 million for FY25. 63 million of that is focused on the University of Arizona's 2 medical schools in Phoenix and Tucson in order to double the number of students at each of those locations. So in order to do that, that requires additional educators, additional supports to help those students with their clinical experiences and other necessary student supports through their educational journey, as well as the equipment and spaces that are necessary in order to handle more students coming through the system. The second piece of that package is a $50 million down payment on ASU Health, which is a collection of new projects at ASU, including a health observatory, a new school of medicine and advanced medical engineering, as well as a school of public health technology. Each of those projects are complicated, involve a lot of spaces and a lot of different initiatives. But as we're trying to get that project up and started, the $50 million is sort of a first contribution towards that effort. The last piece of the Arizona Healthy Tomorrow package for this year is $27 million to Northern Arizona University in order to support the expansion of allied health and other health-related programs that they're working on, including those that focus on rural health in Northern Arizona. We'll be hearing a good deal more detail about this from President Cruz Rivera in September at the board meeting. But in the meanwhile, this is the amount that we have as a placeholder in order to get those initiatives started in the FY25 year. So moving beyond Arizona Healthy Tomorrow, we then focus on access-related initiatives. The headline in this space is the Arizona Promise program. So we have $20 million in recurring funds for Arizona Promise that come each year in the state budget. The last several years, we've had additional one-time dollars in order to boost that up to create opportunities for more students. The total estimated cost of the Arizona Promise program to cover all need-based aid for eligible students in Arizona is $135 million. So this request includes a $115 million net increase that will get us to that $135 million level, so that the Arizona Promise program was the primary funder for need-based aid in Arizona as a standard statewide system, which is what we have said is the goal for that program long-term. In addition to the funding for the Arizona Promise program, we also have an increase for the Arizona Teachers Academy, which is our ongoing program that funds the additional costs that students may incur in order to become a teacher, in order to pursue additional teaching credentials, and in order to qualify for dual enrollment and so forth. That is a forgivable grant program where we give funding to students and then forgive it in exchange for service as a teacher in the state of Arizona. And the goal is really to boost the quality of our Arizona teachers and to get more people into the teaching pipeline at as low a cost as possible. And then the last piece of this is a $10 million request for the College Access and Attainment Network that NAU and the Board of Regents office are working on. This includes a lot of NAU's ongoing work in order to create good connections between the K-12 and community college systems and our university systems, as well as to explore new campus models for education in Arizona that might create new pathways that are not currently represented in our portfolio that would give students more choice in Arizona, especially those kinds of choices that are at modest and straightforward price points. The last piece of our package is around capital investment. So within the capital investment portfolio, a big chunk of that is deferred maintenance. The Arizona statute has over $200 million a year that would be normally contributed to the university system for deferred maintenance, and that formula has been suspended for a good long while. But in the meanwhile, we still have needs that continue to grow and balloon. So the NAU has asked for $50 million towards a single year worth of very necessary building and infrastructure improvements in order to keep their facilities safe and vital. UA has asked for $25 million towards their Biological Sciences East building, which also needs a good amount of deferred maintenance, as well as $25 million for a student engineering innovation lab, which is a cross-disciplinary space that will enable them to increase the number of engineering students by 1,000 that go through UA. And ASU has asked for $25 million towards or sorry, excuse me, $50 million towards ISTB 9, which is an interdisciplinary science and technology building at here at the Tempe campus. That again adds to that engineering, science, and interdisciplinary research capacity here at the university. So across all of those things, that is the entire package. That's the $440 million that are being put forward to the governor's office for consideration. As we consider these things, I will point out a couple of contextual elements. So the first piece is the total is 440 as detailed, but we will note that the FY25 budget includes automatic eliminations of nearly $75 million in funding that is currently allocated to the universities that in one-time dollars that are going to fall away. So at a minimum, the net cost of this proposal, given those reductions, is more like $365 million in total. So that's something to consider as we move forward in these discussions. Additionally, we wanted to put it in context where this amount of money on top of our existing appropriations stacks up historically. So here you see the appropriations to the university system from the state of Arizona from FY08, which was the kind of peak of university appropriations, through the present day, including the total it would be if we included the $440 million that's in the FY25 request. And as you can see there, it is an increase. We have seen an increase in dollars over that time after a very long trough, but we'll also put those dollar amount. Yes.
Just very briefly, is this inflation adjusted? Thank you.
So then we'll put it in context because we know that things have not been the same over the course of that period of time. So this is the amount of state appropriations per full-time equivalent student. So what you see across the bottom is the true dollar cost of how much we were getting in funding per student. And then you see the gray line across the top, and that shows what the FY08 appropriation per student would be if it just held constant in terms of the growth in our system and the growth of inflation. So in today dollars, we are receiving nearly $7,000 per student. Or we would be receiving nearly $7,000 per student if we got the $440 million in full next year. But the equivalent of that in today's dollars, FY08, we were getting $14,000 per student. So we are still far, far below our historical norm as it relates to per student funding, given the extreme amount of growth that we've been able to generate as a system. And with that, I will pause for any comments and ask Chair Deval if he'd be willing to let the university presidents and CFOs provide any other context or join in answering questions that you might have.
Terrific. Any questions from members? Raise your pen.
Chair Deval, I several months ago, when we were in this very room, I believe, and we listened to various health visionary statements from the three presidents. And I appreciate the fact that President Cruz Rivera is going to elaborate on that in September. But I was wondering, in light of what I consider relatively low funding for these initiatives, whether in fact we could hear briefly from the presidents about their vision once more. But then also, I just ask whether indeed these shouldn't be substantially higher than they are, if we're serious about really altering the health care of the people of the state and improving the quality of care through the efforts that we can engage in through the universities.
Appreciate the comment. Other board members before we go to the presidents? Major Herbold.
I have the exact same reaction in that it would seem that we have two big ideas on the table, looking at all the at-risk goals activity over the last 3 months or so. Number one is the whole healthcare surge from all of the universities. And number two, an attempt to build out a system that is catering more toward lower income families. And given how tight the state has been with us, it's curious as to why we would do these things if nobody wants them, namely the legislature. So why wouldn't you ask for $500 million for 20 years, 500 each year, and indicate that if we don't get it, we can't do these things? There's no penalty for them turning this budget down. They look at it as a smorgasbord. It looks to me that this is a very curious process, and that I am an industry guy, that looks at this and says, there's no rationale for any of this anyway, so I turn it down point blank. And that there's no hard argument as to why to do this. We've heard it from each of the presidents, but in terms of the paperwork that we see, you know, you blow it off. So I'm frustrated by the whole process of dealing with the state and the fact that they get away with what they get away with.
Thank you. Other comments? Here's your message.
So my comment is similar in that I think, you know, I think the state has the potential to look at even this request without any increases in the ask for healthcare or a state college system structure as kind of ridiculous and pie in the sky. And so I wanted to be, you know, I think what we were talking about was trying to structure a budget that actually had some logic behind it, at least for this year, that we would need these kinds of funds to start these projects and develop. This certainly is not enough to you know, complete them to full operation. But my concern is that even at this level, we hand this to the governor's office and they go, this is ridiculous. This is a huge amount of money, you know. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what the approach to the governor's office is going to be and the conversation or the written documentation or introduction that accompanies this, that says, you know, this is really, you know, the numbers that we think we need to do what we do and initiate these projects. We're not downplaying how much they're going to cost because we think you won't fund them. We just need you to know what reality is. And so I'm curious if we have developed that introduction, verbiage, whatever it is that goes with this, that makes them, as you said, not just go and toss it aside.
John, I'm going to ask John to respond to that particular question because he's obviously the budget guy, and then go to the presidents. So get ready.
Thank you. Regent Duval and regents and lots of thoughts. In many ways, the state views budget development in two ways. One, expenditures are defensive. You know, where the state's trying to prevent bad things from happening to the existing infrastructure of the state and people in general. And so there's a significant amount of defensive spending. And that is generally prioritized over what I would argue is offensive spending. You know, offensive spending is investments in the economy.
Which definition of offensive?
Yeah. Think football. You know, investments in the infrastructure of the state, which I would argue large investments in the university system are you know, those type of offensive, not offending, but offensive expenditures to try to advance the state. So there's this unique balance. Number two, this board has a unique charge and responsibility that is given to this board by both the Constitution and by the legislature and the governor. That is different than the responsibilities of the governor and the legislature. They fold together for sure, but this body has a unique responsibility. And so to get to Regent Herbold's point, if the legislature doesn't give us any money to advance healthcare in this state, is this board going to say, no, we're not going to advance healthcare in this state? Because I don't think that's what this board will do. And so it puts us in
Why
this,
not?
because I believe the majority of the board believes this board has a responsibility to leverage the assets that we have to advance outcomes for the state, including better health outcomes. And whether the state's a partner in that or not, I think the board will try to do that. Now, if the state is a significant partner, as we want them to be, are we going to be able to do that at a much accelerated pace? The answer to that is yes. And so how do we approach the governor's office in that dynamic and context? And that's one word I've considered using with them, is accelerated. Are we going to go try to work on promise programs and new campus models and relationships with the community colleges and rolling out a healthcare initiative. We are. Can we get that done over the next decade without help from the state? Probably not. And so do you want this to be a 20-year project that's, I almost said a bad word. I'm sorry. That's half good. Or do you want,
Go ahead, John, say it. It'll be good for you.
or do we want to build an economy that's going to lead the nation and do something really spectacular here? And that's a decision they have to make, but we're going to do our damnedest. And
Yeah.
so, you know, that's, and I've been invited to the governor's office next week to sit down with them and explain what our budget request is. And Regent Duval and I had a preliminary meeting with the governor already about what are some of these elements. And we said, we're going to tell you the truth. And the truth is, you know, we're going to try to advance on these things. If we don't get this kind of investment from the state, we're still going to try, but it's going to be significantly harder and significantly delayed. That would be the balance I would suggest. And that's brainstorming a little bit.
Thank you. Regent Mason.
Yeah, so I guess my initial response to that is if the state is prioritizing defensive spending, how do we turn the narrative around what we're doing to turn the projects that we're doing into defensive spending? So if we don't improve the healthcare situation in this state, you know, people already can't get into a primary care physician. People already are delaying, surgeries, needed activities. Those outcomes, I mean, that to me is defensive. And so, I mean, if we know that that's where the state prioritizes their money, I would hope that we can take, as much as we see these as future looking and improving the future, if they need to be, hey, if we don't, here's the situation, it's bad enough now that you need to spend some money on it. And I think healthcare in particular is at that point. I think it's at an inflection point. I don't know when the rest, when any of you have tried to get into a physician, but it's a challenge.
I agree with that.
So if there's a way to do that, I'm all in for that. Same thing with, and I don't know, the Promise program, defensive spending, getting kids to college, then you have this frustrating conversation about the value of college, but that is still, bar none, one of the highest, economic mobility factors. There's no other way to cut that.
Sure. Look, and I guess I would add, because we generally, and the president specifically, are good stewards of their institutions, when we are faced with cuts, there are these significant efforts made to make sure that it does not affect the quality of faculty, the student experience, our core business. It has huge effects on our ability to meet the moment going forward, to meet the ambitions that we have for the universities, drive the Arizona economy, et cetera. But those tend to be less visible because they are aspirational, not personal. And so part of this conversation ought to be how we educate the governor and legislature as to how these cuts are impacting our loss of opportunity, our loss of ambition. And at some point, if the state continues to underfund as it has, much less cut like they did last year, it will affect the student experience. And we, at some point, will have to have really hard conversations about what those cuts look like. Do our, Regent Herbold and I have had a conversation, do our rural campuses that lose money, should those be a public conversation? Maybe so. I mean, I do think that we need to spotlight the tensions that exist within the budget dynamic. And we've just done a great job of trying to charge ahead, put a good picture on it, but we keep a lot of the realities of what you all are dealing with hidden from public view, and maybe we ought to put a spotlight on them. So we're thinking about, however, before I go to the president's, today asks us to approve the budget request. And so as the president speak, I would ask the regions to think about, given the comments that were made, do we want to approve this budget request today or not? So with that, I'm going to turn to the presidents in seniority order. So President Crow.
I am the oldest, but sorry. So let me, this would be a longer conversation, but I want to go back to the business leader, political conservative chair of the search committee that hired me, Don Ulrich, 21 years ago, who said, and the other regents wanted this, please find a way to build an entrepreneurial university which is not reliant on the state as its core funding. And at the time that I took this job, the majority of the revenue to this university came from state appropriations. The majority of the revenue came from state appropriations. Our tuition revenue in the year that I took office was $125 million. Our tuition revenue this year is more than $2.6 billion. So that's a dramatic transformation of the funding mechanism for the institution. So we have slowly evolved and come to a thing which is politically, in some ways, difficult even for fiscal conservatives, be they Democrats or Republicans or independents, to sort of grasp. And that is, we built an institution which generates 12 times the revenue that the state invests in the institution to accomplish its mission from other sources. 12x. We're trying to get to the point of 15 to 18x, 15 to 18 times the public investment. This is what the regents that appointed me all these eons ago asked for. Please build a different kind of university. I mean, I remember in the interview process, which was elongated, multi-level, multiple people, all kinds of things. What they said was, we can no longer run the university on the assumptive model that the people of Arizona, like other states, just want a public university funded by the people. They want an entrepreneurial university invested in by the people. I said, now that sounds like a cool project. Let's figure out how to do that. And so slowly over time, and I'm using this as a short preface, I apologize, to the nature of our budget request this year, because I want to put it into specific context. We built what we use in every possible way is the concept of a public enterprise. Chartered by the public, owned by the public, serving the public, invested in by the public, but using entrepreneurial ways to advance its mission, leveraging all of its assets, leveraging partnerships, leveraging its real estate. And that's what we do. That's how we operate. In fact, we do things that sometimes the board is like, what is that? Or why does that work? Or what about that? Well, it might be some strategy that we're taking that could generate a $300 million net positive margin on some aspect of something that we're doing that would allow us to pay for more kids from Arizona to come to the university. So just as a side point of that, I loathe the concept of a phrase used in academia called discount rate. We have no discount rate. We invest in people from Arizona to come to this institution with cash money that we generate from other aspects of the institution to pay for those students to come to the institution. And so then segueing then in the notion of public enterprise, we've gotten some politicians to understand the model of public enterprise, but not very many. It's I don't know why, but we haven't done that yet. But nonetheless, that's how we're operating. The state will invest about $400 million in our institution this year. We will generate about $4.8 billion of other revenue. And our budget request is reflective of this model. So ASU Promise. So ASU Promise is the highest order objective because that's the objective of making certain that no one from Arizona is left out of the university because of some triviality of the fact that your rusty trailer park that you live in and your mom who works as a lunch lady at the lunch counter is not going to keep your 30 ACT brain out of college and not completing college. And so we do that now, but we need to do it more because we're still, even though all that we're doing, we're still underserving. So ASU Promise, $67 million request just for ASU because of our population size, 180 million overall. That will allow us to do more, to bring in more kids, to now bring more workers into the workforce. And as Regent Manson suggested, the rhetoric out there that college isn't really worth it is false rhetoric. I mean, it's purposeful, designed, politically motivated, false rhetoric. The economic argument is unequivocal. The return on your investment in going to university is about between 12 and 14% per year ROI over your lifetime. It's an unbelievable return. Even as just a teacher, even at the superintendent's been arguing for some higher salaries for teachers, which I support. Even for them, it's a 7% return on their investment in the university over their life. So our core request is ASU Promise. Let me just put that into perspective, and what we need to find are better ways to make this articulation of this argument. So we have more than 50,000 students from Arizona attending ASU in full immersion on campus mode. More than 50,000. 12,000 of them as undergraduates from Arizona come from families with under $35,000 in family income. No family with a $35,000 family income can afford what it costs to go here. No one. No one. Even with the Pell Grant of $7,000, give or take. So we support them all. We support every mechanism for those people to get through the institution. ASU, the Arizona Promise, would allow us to serve a few more. Allow us to maybe move that up to 40,000. Allow us to do some other things with middle-class kids, where a lot of middle-class kids are earning merit scholarships and have fantastic scholarships. And I've given all the regions the data. What we need to find is a way to make this Arizona Promise argument. The ASU Health argument, our request is as follows. We would like to have a $50 million core support for what will ultimately be an annual expenditure of activity 15 times that. We will raise the 15 times. All we need is the core support. If you don't give us the core support, we're still going to do it. It will just take longer, and it will be possibly less Arizona centric, because we have to find other partners to make things happen. And so our request for $50 million is a tiny fraction of what we will ultimately do, and what we will ultimately build. You know, if I'm talking, it's not 10 times the 50, like we're going to raise 500. It's 15 times the 50 per year. So we will build a multi-billion-dollar ASU Health thing with a small state investment of $50 million. Now, any rational, logical, economically grounded individual, knowing the health issues in Arizona, knowing what we need in Arizona, more doctors, more nurses, more this, more that, more solutions, more public education, would sign up for that deal in 1 second if they knew that whoever was proposing it could deliver it. Well, we can deliver it because we have the right team, we have the right institution and the right design. So it is a model that we haven't found a way, and perhaps Regent Goodyear is going to give us all of the political wisdom in the known universe to figure out how to do this. We're not asking for the stars or the moon. We're asking for a small core investment for what will become a major institution affecting the outcome of the entire state. And then this little $50 million that we're asking for as one piece of one building. So it's $50 million against $1 billion per year of capital investments that we're making. And all it helps us to do is to accelerate that particular project, ISTB 9, Interdisciplinary Science and Technology Building number 9. There will be news that people will hear about ASU that we're just getting a little wind of without giving any details in the next few weeks. Unbelievable. The most significant things we've ever won, and we've won the most significant things we've won in research in the last 12 months beyond anything that we've ever done. And we're about to hit something out of the park that we now know the ball is off the bat and moving. And so, and we just know that as of this morning. All of that is a function of us being able to build a world-class research university. And so the state's investment in a world-class research university at ASU is de minimis. At Texas A&M, just to remind the regents, the former president of Texas A&M told me once in a moment of sort of letting down his hair, I can't even build all the buildings for the money the state gives us here in Texas. I don't even know what to do in them. This was Mike when at College Station. And so I'm like, man. So we have a great request. It's a small request. It may be politically, not read in the right way. For the investment requests that we're making, ASU Promise, ASU Health, and this one research facility, the other items are minor by comparison. It's a small thing that will then further ASU into the regions have seen all these numbers, so there shouldn't be anything surprising. We're moving to a $7 billion, $8 billion a year enterprise, having massive impact across the entire state on all things, including new companies, new industries. I am certain of this, that I am certain that I don't speak the right English, that I'm speaking some kind of strange don't know, like island dialect or something, because we have built the modeled institution that Arizonans for decades have said they wanted. We are that right now. So we don't need much money. This isn't much money, but we would like to get this. And we will do many more things for it. And now what we need to find is a way to tell that story. Now, one last point, if you cut, as the economy is growing, if you make certain that you always cut taxes at the exact rate that the economy is growing, so that the tax rate can go down, which I understand and support. But if it's always the exact amount, it's just a little hard to get investments. I mean, it's just because they're sort of like, one is going down and one is going up at the same time. So it's kind of an equilibrium. And I get the equilibrium, but these are small, trivial things. And so one last point. The Arizona economy is approaching a $500 billion a year economy. That is larger than the economy of all but about 34 countries. And all of those countries that are above us make substantially more investments in these kinds of things than we do in Arizona. And so I just think that there is an argument to make these kinds of very small, limited investments, showing the kinds of returns that we can deliver. So that's our budget request for this year. It is a purely public enterprise model way of moving forward. We've abandoned the old model. We're working off the new model. And for the most part, and I will say that the regions have been unbelievably supportive and powerful in their support of allowing us to do new kinds of things. And we have projects underway right now that could generate $300, $400, $500 million of new revenue for the institution that are not normal projects, but they would generate for us these kinds of revenues that then allow us to do these kinds of things. So.
Okay, thank you, President Crow. President Robbins.
We have very straightforward 3 requests.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay to ask a question? at this
Absolutely,
juncture?
yes, I apologize. Please do.
I totally agree with the way you're approaching this. And to me, it is the goal, become a private university with a small amount of interaction with the boys in the state as possible, because they don't behave well. And the question on my mind is, are we ever, as a board, going to get to the point where we basically totally give up and say, okay, all 3 of our universities need to become private with a small p so that they don't recognize it at the legislature? And we'll continue to play this little game of asking for small amounts each year, probably get turned down on a few, and maybe get a few. That's kind of the model. We have basically assumed that the state is not going to support us. Therefore, Genius works in terms of the entrepreneurship that has caused ASU and other schools to become what they have.
Well, the $1 billion they're giving us is not trivial.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, it's not untrivial. I mean,
Yeah.
but it's 8% of your
Yeah,
budget.
yes.
So let's get real. You have to do the things you just explained. And
Yeah.
I think the board totally supports and enthusiastically supports that kind of approach. But it angers me that the state can misbehave to the extent that it does. And that's what I'm frustrated by.
Thank you. Other comments, questions of ASU before we go to U of A? Okay, President Robbins.
We have 3 simple, straightforward budget requests. We're always grateful for support for students, and I won't elaborate more on what President Crow said, but we have needs also. A third of our students are first-generation students coming from low-income families. So the Promise program, I would like to see more money, but this is what we're asking for in our proposal. Going back to the vision for what we see as the vision beyond the vision for being the academic medical center to take care of the health and wellness of the state of Arizona, we think we need physicians. So our request for support of doubling a system that is now over 50 years old in Tucson and over 10 years old in Phoenix to produce twice as many physicians is one that I think is investing in an infrastructure that's already there, and it will allow us to do that quickly if we get this funding. I've been obviously very supportive of ASU, even NAU starting your medical school, if you ever choose to do that. And with Mayo and Creighton and the others we have, we're still going to be short of physicians. We're going to have net imports. But this would go a long way of keeping Arizonans in Arizona and where you do your training. There's nothing in here about GME, but that's a big part of the continuum of the medical education journey. And then infrastructure for the two buildings we have. The Biosciences East building, it needs drastic renovations. It's a dated building. It'll provide a space for new lab work, but also importantly, swing space for when we have to relocate as we're renovating other buildings in the future. And then the Innovation Center for the engineering building. We want to grow engineering. We would love to double the size of our engineering class and faculty over the next 5 years. And we'll still be probably 1/10 the size of ASU.
We're gonna have 1 million students.
Yeah. We won't. So that's our request, and I think the very impassioned words that we've heard today provide all the rationale if there's reception. So we're on transmit mode, but we need a receiver.
Questions of President Robbins from members of the board? Okay. President Cruz-Rivera, and you.
Well, I'll try to avoid slipping into island dialect. But we also have three major requests as our sister institutions. Of course, top of mind is the Arizona Promise program, as it will help enhance our ability at MAU to advance our access mission. We are, as you all know, through our Access to Excellence initiative already investing institutional funds to try to advance this. With these additional Arizona Promise dollars, to Director Arnold's previous points, we'll be able to accelerate our efforts on this front. In terms of the capital, it's all deferred maintenance. We have one of the most beautiful college campuses in the nation, and we need to take care of it and create the right teaching and learning environment for our students. It's a very small investment, to Regent Herbold's point, given our holdings in infrastructure. But it will go a long ways to getting us on the right track. And perhaps the largest investment, which we are looking at as sort of a placeholder for now, before we make our major announcements in September around our MAU Health initiatives, is really to ensure that we can accelerate progress. It's really an investment round we're asking for, to accelerate progress towards our commitment to double the number of degrees we award in health-related fields by the year 2030, and also some big plans that we will announce in September as to how we can complement the work that our sister institutions are doing, U of A with the science of medicine, and ASU with the engineering of medicine. We will be in the people and communities of medicine space. And so really looking at the primary health area. And so clearly, I am with Regent Herbold on this. Not enough we're asking for, but we're looking at this sort of as a venture or a seed investment to get the ball rolling and allow us to build a stronger value proposition for the state in the years ahead.
Very good. Questions, comments? I've just got a note from Regent Brewster, but I don't think he's any longer with us. He had a question on healthcare. Nope, not there. Okay. So our action item today is to approve the budget request. There's been some observations made. Oh, is he back? Okay. Regent Brewster, didn't know if I just got your text. Did you want to speak or leave it with the text you sent me?
Leave it with the text I sent, and just again supporting a bigger budget ask. I certainly understand Dr. Crow's rationale and over a period of 10 years, but I just see the healthcare initiative being supremely larger, more significant for the state of Arizona than anything we've taken on before. Therefore, budget amounts should reflect that. That's kind of where my opinion is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Regent. All right, so our action item is to approve the budget request. It is due in the governor's office in September. We do meet again in 2 weeks. We could, at that point, amend it. I guess I think it would behoove the process for us to move forward with what we have, but if regents want to have a chance to reflect on it over the next 2 weeks and then come back to it for some modifications, we can certainly do that, but we do need something baseline to turn in. So with that in mind, I'd like to move that the board approve the FY 2025 state budget request for the universities and the ABOR office as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those say aye.
Aye.
John?
I was just gonna say, if there is a desire for the board to significantly increase the health portion of this, I would hate to submit a budget request that lays down a marker and then come back 2 weeks later and say, you know, we really want to double that. So either we take a moment here to build on that conversation a little bit, or we submit a budget with that line blank and say, we'll be back once we have President Cruz Rivera's presentation and amend our budget request the last day of September. You know, I think we could do it that way. I think the governor's office would be amenable to that. But I would suggest not turning in a placeholder number if the board intends to really change it. Sorry to interrupt your vote, but
What I can say is that our $50 million number is not a casually derived number. It's our calculation of what we need to then generate $750 million a year of other funding. And so we've been through the calculations. We have other partners, other groups that we're working on. It's a real number. It's a large number. The state has not invested $50 million in an initiative for us ever.
and it's my understanding the University of Arizona number is a calculated number to accomplish the goal that we've stated.
No, absolutely.
Okay, Regent Penley.
Thank you, Chair DeVaul. I'd like to explain why I'm going to call for this motion to be tabled. And it relates to exactly what John Arnold just said. I understand President Crow's argument that this is a well-designed $50 million that clearly lays out where he's going. We have a chance, as John just said, to hear President Cruz Rivera lay out his proposal. And frankly, I wouldn't mind hearing you, President Robbins, review your vision. So if we do $63 million, will we double in a year, 5 years, 10 years?
5 years.
Well, but that's the kind of thing, but with more detail that I'd like to hear about. So I think delaying this is a reasonable idea. At least that's my opinion. So I do move to table the motion.
Can I speak to that point?
Yes.
Just to understand the process, state law requires us to submit a budget on September 1st. We can seek a delay to that, but the governor's office does not need to give us a delay. They are anticipating our budget on September 1st. So tabling the motion puts us in somewhat of an awkward position in not having a document to submit on that date.
And John, for clarification, submitting a budget with a blank in a category or two meets the standard and requirement of the statute.
Mr. Chair, yes, and in prior years, a couple of times we have communicated, you know, here is our baseline budget that we submit on September 1st. We have a board meeting in September. We will be submitting an amendment to that budget post that board meeting. I think we did that 2 or 3 times with the Ducey administration. They were fine with that. I think in this case, if we approved an amended budget that left the healthcare as a placeholder, then I can explain to the governor's office what we're doing, and then we'll be submitting an addendum more than an amendment to the budget request at the end of September.
Then I withdraw my motion to table, and I propose the amended budget as described by John Arnold.
Yes, Regent Mata.
So how likely is our amendment will pass higher? I mean, because we're not gonna have the same numbers. I'm sure that the president will increase their ask.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Regent Mata, I don't know if they'll increase their ask. I think President Cruz Rivera likely will.
Okay,
And in fact, when we already put a caveat in here that the NAU number is somewhat of a placeholder until we have the conversation in September. And that's part of our baseline. So we did anticipate updating the governor's office on the NAU specific healthcare initiative at the end of September. We can certainly include ASU and UA in that and say, here's our baseline numbers. We may update these at the end of September. If it's a significant update, I would be a little nervous about that. If it's tweaking, and in their case, there's new ideas that we're going to explore in September. So there's ample logic for that. The 26 million that's there's a story behind that 26. We're adding to that story. Here comes the additional story. If it's just, we changed our mind, ASU's doing the same thing, we just want 100 million now, that's a more difficult narrative.
okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Regent Penley, with your permission, then what I'd like to do is treat your comments as a friendly motion, the motion on the table, so that the motion essentially be that we approve the budget request with the caveat that the healthcare number may be subject to subsequent change at our future meeting. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, John. Okay, we will now recess the public meeting and take a short break, 10-minute break before convening an executive session shortly after 10 o'clock in this room to conduct annual reviews with the Enterprise Executive Committee, President Cruz Rivera and Executive Director Arnold, and for other items on the executive session agenda. I will ask that those not participating in the executive session, please gather your items and leave the room as we recess. As a reminder, the board will adjourn at approximately 4:15 or at the end of executive session. Do I have a motion to enter an exec? Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you.